Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away, wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today, calling from.
All right, so the end of chapter 46 and chapter 47 is what we covered last time. Joseph settled his family in Egypt. He brings his father Jacob and all of his brothers and their children in families to Egypt. They totaled about 70 in number at the time. Settled them in the land of Goshen, where Pharaoh granted for them to have the choice land in Goshen within Egypt. And then Joseph provided for them during the famine. Now, all this is important. Land was given to them and food was given to them during the remainder of the famine. All the while, Joseph is managing Egypt's resources during the famine, and he had a system in place where he exchanged the food that they had stored for the Egyptians' livestock and for their money, and then eventually they offered their land and even themselves in servitude to Pharaoh. And so he consolidated Pharaoh's power in Egypt. And so what you see going on simultaneously is the Egyptians losing freedom and economic power as individual citizens, and the descendants of Jacob, or Israel, the Israelites is what they would later be called, actually gaining freedom and liberation and wealth in Egypt at the same time. Jacob then gets near his death, and so he instructs Joseph regarding his burial. Anybody remember what he said? Don't bury me in Egypt. Take me back to where my forefathers are buried and bury me there. And of course, Joseph agreed to do that for his father. And that is where we left off, and we're now in chapter 48 as we get even closer to Jacob's death. It says, it came about after these things that Joseph was told, behold, your father is sick. So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. All right, Manasseh and Ephraim. What do we know about Manasseh and Ephraim? They're Joseph's sons with an Egyptian wife that he took from his time in Egypt, and so they are part Egyptian. So what we're fixing to read here is very significant, and that's why it's here, so that we understand. When it was told to Jacob, behold, your son Joseph has come to you, Israel collected his strength. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed this. We talked about it very briefly last time. The end of the last chapter and this chapter is doing this. I think pretty much the rest of the book does this. It's interchanging his given name and then the name that God gave him back and forth. I mean, this is in the very same sentence that both of them are used. Behold, your son Joseph has come to you. Israel collected his strength, sat up in bed, and Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. That's way back in like chapter 28 or something. He said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Give what land? The land of Canaan. So we need to understand what he's talking about. He's basically recounting to Joseph the things that were promised to him. And now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. So what is Jacob claiming? Or what is he doing, maybe is a better way to put it. He's adopting them. He says, those two sons of yours, they're my sons now. Just like Reuben is my son, just like Simeon is my son, they are my sons. They are going to be considered my children, not your children. Listen to what he goes on to say, but your offspring that have been born after them shall be yours. So it's just those two. All the rest of your children, they're going to be yours. But those two are going to be considered my children. What did that do? That gave them an inheritance. That made them a part of the promise. So it's a very significant thing that happens. That's why we have what we generally call, they're not called this in the Bible, they're called this by everybody that studies the Bible, the half-tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Why are they called the half-tribes? Well, because they replaced Joseph. Joseph doesn't have an inheritance, or he doesn't receive an inheritance. Joseph's two sons receive an inheritance in his place. So that's what's happening here, and that's the significance of this. That's why their children are all considered Israelites. And there's no distinction made between them and any other Israelite, despite the fact that they were one half Egyptian, and therefore their children were quarter Egyptian, and it took several generations before the Egyptian got watered down to a point that it was probably not discernible anymore. But anyway, as far as the promise is concerned, and that's what happens here. This is what God appeared to me in a vision. He told me these things. He made these promises to you. Now I'm adopting your two sons. They're now my children. So they're part of that inheritance. They're part of that promise. Now, as for me, verse 7, when I came from Paddan, Rachel died to my sorrow in the land of Canaan on the journey, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, who are these? And Joseph said to his father, they are my sons, whom God has given me here. So he said, bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. So that's the next phase in this. Okay, the sons are brought in the room. He says, okay, who are these two? These are the sons that you just adopted. He said, all right, bring them over here that I can offer them a blessing. Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well. Understand, see is being used accommodatively. Joseph took them from his knees. He bowed with his face to the ground. Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right. All right, what are we being told there? And what he does is he crosses his hands, which is going to become a point of contention in just a minute. Israel stretched out his right hand, laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and may my name live on in them. And the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. And he's connecting these two boys to that promise that started with Abraham, that then was passed on to Isaac, that then came to Jacob. Bless them in my name and connect them back to my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Let them be a part of the promise. That was the promise, right? You're going to have a multitude of offspring, and in your offspring all the world is going to be blessed. Those were the two aspects of it. I'm going to make a great nation of you. You're going to have so many offspring. He said what? More than the stars in the heavens are than the dust on the ground. So he said, let them multiply and be a part of that. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him. And why did it displease him? Yeah, the firstborn should be the right hand. And so now, when I read this, I'm going to tell you how I read it. It displeased him, not like it made him angry, but it displeased him in the sense that he thought his father was making a mistake. And so he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. And so his response to his son is, I know what I'm doing. And he blessed them that day, saying, by you Israel shall pronounce blessing, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. In other words, they're going to be such a blessing that comes upon them. People would say, may you be blessed like they're blessed. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, by the way, that's just yet another example of the birth order thing being turned upside down within the family. It's happened over and over and over again. Jacob over Esau. Isaac over Ishmael. Ishmael was kind of just pushed off to the side, sent away. Still going to become a great nation, Ishmael is, but it ain't part of this. Judah's end up going to be chosen for the blessing of bringing the Messiah into the world rather than his three older brothers. And so this birth order thing is not absolute. We'll say it like that. Israel said to Joseph, behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. And I give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. And so Joseph gets two portions. Why? Because he had two sons that were chosen. By the way, how do we end up with 12 divisions of the land and 12 tribes if Joseph is the 12th son and it got divided into two portions? Levi didn't have an inheritance. So that's how that happened. So this is the blessing. This is what brings Ephraim and Manasseh into the fold and makes them a part of the promise. And God is invoked. We have to understand some things here. This is not Jacob just acting on his own. This is Jacob carrying out the will of God. Jacob summoned his sons and said, assemble yourselves that I may tell you what shall befall you in the days to come. All right, so he then brings all his sons together. And he says, let me tell you what's going to happen. So we get a little bit of prophecy that's going on here, along with the greater scheme, which is the granting of the blessing to his sons. Gather together and hear, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben's the firstborn. You're my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength. You're the first one, preeminent in dignity, preeminent in power. You're my firstborn, uncontrolled as water. which is an interesting expression. Uncontrolled as water, which is, yeah, and the point is what? Okay, so what about water or liquid, might we say, is unstable or uncontrolled? Yeah, you can't, you ever tried to restrain the ocean? If we could control water, what would never happen? Floods wouldn't happen. But they do. Why? Because water goes where it wants to go. Actually, it doesn't. It goes where God allows it to go. Why do we have dry land? Because God said, thus far shall your waves go and no further. And he created dry land. He gathered all the waters together, way back in the opening of this book. At chapter 6, what did God do? He released those controls, and what did water do? It covered the entire earth. And then what did he do? He put it back in place. But man has no power over water. We try sometimes, and it works for a while until something goes wrong. And so it's just an expression about the nature of water and saying that he shares in personality that particular nature, which is what? The inability to control, or the inability to, what was the language? Stay. He's unstable. Because, now here's the reason. Why do I call you unstable? Why do I say that you're uncontrolled? Why do I say that you're a force of nature? That's how we talk about people that are forces of nature, that can't be stopped, that can't be controlled, that can't be reined in, because you went up to your father's bed and you defiled it. He went up to my couch. And what does that have reference to? Anybody remember? Bilhah. He went into Bilhah, which was Jacob's wife or concubine, or one of Leah's servants, I think, or was that one of Rachel's servants? Anyway, one of them. So basically he says, you don't have any self-control, and so I was hopeful, you're my firstborn, but no. Simeon and Levi, that's Numbers 2 and 3, are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. What's that all about? Shechem, that's right. And the whole deal with their sister. And the revenge. And they killed all those people. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So the real problem here isn't that they fought. Listen, all of these boys had fought. All of these people had gone to war. Jacob had gone to war. All of that was sanctioned by God. The problem is what they did was not sanctioned by God. It was self-willed. And this is different than Reuben's problem, because Reuben's just uncontrolled or unstable. They knew exactly what they were doing. They're just mean. Yes, they were. I mean, there was a whole plan. And they carried it out. And by the way, not all that different than how they treated their brother Joseph. If it hadn't been for Reuben, Joseph would be dead. Why? Because they were cruel. And so he says, that's a problem for you. Judah, your brother shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down to you. So basically, Judah is going to be in that position. That language, your father's son shall bow down to you, to me harkens back to the vision that we generally view as applying to Joseph, and that did apply to Joseph as the ruler in Egypt. But in the spiritual side of things, according to this, it applies to Judah. And ultimately, Judah represents who? The Christ, because that's where he arises from. And so clearly by the time we get to the Christ, who bows down to the Christ? Every knee shall bow before Jesus. Every tongue shall confess. And so this is also messianic in nature. What's not necessarily fulfilled in the individual Reuben is fulfilled in his descendant. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. That's a clear reference to the Christ. Nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. That is as well. So he is going to, I want y'all to be as excited about class as those people are. Jesus, once he takes over the scepter, once he takes his place, once he becomes king of his kingdom, there shall be no end. So this is messianic in nature. And it's the first picture, by the way, in this story. Keep in mind, the whole story is telling us how we get from Genesis 3:15 and through the seed of woman, our enemy is going to be put down. How's that going to happen? Well, all of this has been about that story. And this is the first picture we get, that it's through Judah that that's going to happen. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. He ties his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are dull from wine, his teeth are white from milk. I don't know exactly what all that imagery is portraying, still working on some of it. Some of it's easier than others.
Verse 12, again, this is the English Standard. His eyes are darker than wine rather than dull from
Yep.
wine.
I certainly like it better. And just so y'all know, if anybody's curious, in this particular class, I'm actually teaching the New American Standard Bible. Mainly because all my notes, my marginal notes that I hand wrote out 30 years ago are in this book. So, Zebulun shall dwell at the seashore. He shall be a haven for ships, and his flank shall be toward Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey. That's a real compliment. Lying down between the sheepfolds. When he saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, he bowed his shoulder to bear burdens and became a slave at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Now, this is where we get the language tribes of Israel, as far as I know, for the very first time. And so he's talking, and that's what we see here in this verse, and what's significant here is he's talking to his sons, but he makes it clear that it's not just them, that it's their descendants that are being talked about. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path that bites the horse's heel so that his rider falls backward. In other words, he's going to be an impediment to some people. For thy salvation I wait, O Lord. As for Gad, raiders shall raid him, but he shall raid at their heels. As for Asher, his food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a doe let loose. he gives beautiful words. Joseph is a fruitful bough, a fruitful bough by a spring, its branches run over a wall. The archers bitterly attacked him and shot at him and harassed him, but his bow remained firm and his arms were agile from the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. From the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father have surpassed the blessings of my ancestors up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of the one distinguished among his brothers. Poor Benjamin. All I'm going to say about that is Joseph was clearly Jacob's favorite. And then he thought Joseph died, and who became his favorite? Benjamin. But now Joseph is back. And that's got to be a particularly daunting situation, to spend most of your life as the favored child and then to be replaced. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning, he devours the prey, and in the evening, he divides the spoil. Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin was an important tribe. Ephraim was an important tribe as well in the warring of Israel. These were people who were skilled at those martial arts that you implement in war, and they were vital to the success of the nation. So then it says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. So there they are. He's identified them as tribes. And this is what their father said to them when he blessed them. He blessed them, every one, with the blessing appropriate to him. And again, these blessings don't originate with the Father. These blessings originate with the Father, God. That's why they have force behind them. The reflection of these blessings are not that they had some kind of power to bestow these things. This is prophetic. He is saying, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Jacob is essentially doing what Joseph did in Egypt, speaking for God. And so this is the way it's going to be. Then he charged them and said to them, I'm about to be gathered to my people. What's he mean, be gathered to my people? Okay, he's going to die. Why is that an idiom for dying, being gathered to my people? Okay. He was going to go the way of his ancestors. The same thing that happened to Abraham when he died. The same thing that happened to Isaac when he died. Well, it's about to happen to me. My spirit's going to depart my body, and I'm going to go where they are. I'm about to be gathered by people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. Now, what is that cave is? Anybody remember? It's in Hebron, and he bought it, negotiated the price. They actually tried to give it to him. They said, use whatever cave you want, bury him wherever you want to. And he said, what? Oh, no, I'm going to pay you for it. He insisted on paying them. And he says, bring my body back there. I am about to be gathered with my ancestors. Bring my body back to that cave. Did they have a concept of the spirit and of the body? Clearly, he had some concept of it. He knew that his spirit was leaving his body, and his body needed to be put in the cave. His body wasn't going to be with his ancestors. His spirit was. In the cave that's in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah. And there I buried Leah. So in that cave is Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Leah. The field of the cave that is in it, purchased from the sons of Heth. He says, I want to be buried with all of our ancestors. When Jacob finished charging his sons, he drew his feet into the bed. What does it mean he drew his feet into the bed? Yeah, he had set up. You remember the beginning of this, it says that he pulled his strength together and he set up to engage with Joseph. And then he called all the rest of them in. So he's sitting on the side of the bed. He has this discourse. He finishes the discourse. He lays back down. He drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. Again, his body's still laying there in that bed. But he leaves his body. He breathes his last. Who is that also used to talk about? Jesus on the cross. So all of this has that same dimension of discussion, connecting these things with the ultimate goal in fulfillment. He was going to be buried in a cave. Where was Jesus buried? In a cave. What's the distinction between him and the Lord? He stayed in the cave and Jesus didn't, which a big deal is made of in the back half of the New Testament in talking about Jesus. It's also a big deal made of it in terms of the very first gospel sermon, the fact that David, who had written a psalm about my body shall not see corruption, Peter said, David's body is with us to this day. It's buried to this very day. The tomb's still there. The body's still in it. When he wrote that, he was a prophet. He wasn't talking about himself. He was talking about the Lord. So there's distinctions, but all of this has messianic overtones, and it's supposed to. We're supposed to be realizing, okay, we're now, if you're reading this from the beginning, this is the first time you've ever read it, you don't know that yet. But that's where the story's going. And that's why it's kind of fun to go back and reread it after you know the end of the story, because you can start going, oh, wait a minute. That was kind of foreshadowing this. That's connected to this. And you start putting those things together. And the more you do that, the more exciting these things become. When I taught the book of Numbers, I titled that class. Anybody remember what I titled that class? The Exciting Book of Numbers. And when I announced it, everybody went and gave me that really confused face. And I said, I promise by the time we're done, it's going to be exciting. Because what we see in that book, again, is a whole lot of connections and overtones about what's happening with ourselves in Christ. And you go back and you read those things again with that post-fulfillment knowledge. It just opens up a whole world of amazement. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. Joseph loved his dad too. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So Jacob was embalmed in Egyptian style. I don't know where that cave is, but it's entirely possible that body's still there, because those Egyptian embalmers were pretty talented. So the physicians embalmed Israel. And again, there's another example where he's called Jacob in the beginning of the verse. He's called Israel at the end of the verse. We're talking about the same person. He's continuing to do that back and forth. So we are starting to connect. And by the way, why was his name changed to Israel? Because he wrestled with God. Striving with God is what the word Israel means. How appropriate is that for the nation that rose up from his loins, that spent their entire existence doing what? striving with God. I mean, from day one, once they became a nation, from day one, it was a fight. Day after day after day after day, a struggle. And by the way, that's applicable to us as well, because it's what our lives essentially are, is as we struggle with God and ourselves. Because ultimately, struggling with God is doing what? Well, yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what we do if we come in line and subject ourselves to God. When struggling with God is me asserting my will over God's. Me doing what I want to do instead of what He's instructed me to do. Me doing self-willed behavior rather than being directed by Him, which is why Paul, when he gets to his story later, he says what? It's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. He had learned to give way to the leading of God. By the way, that's not where he started. Where did he start? What did Jesus say to him when he appeared to him on the road to Damascus? Why do you kick against the goads? Why are you struggling against what the prophets have always said? That's the essence of that question to Paul. Paul had grown to the point where he had relinquished his own will. That's what we need to be doing. Yep. He fought with himself the whole time until he was able to relinquish his will and just follow God. That is the goal for every one of us. And it's what we do. And this story, the story of Israel, is reflective of our own stories in our own lives. So when we read this story and we say, well, how could they do something so foolish as that? They know better. Stop, look in the mirror. Because you're talking about yourself. It's another David and Nathan moment. Where Nathan hears a story and says, oh, well, somebody that does that deserves to die. Well, yeah, I'm talking about you. Every time we do that, reading the story of Israel as a nation, and we say, why are they so stubborn? Why are they insisting on that? Why are they not doing what? We're talking about ourselves. "40 days were required for it." That's a long embalming process. 40 days required for it, such as the period required for embalming, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. Now, this is another powerful thing. This is how much influence Joseph had in Egypt. When Joseph's father died, for over 2 months, the nation mourned his loss. When the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, behold, I am about to die in my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, then I'll return. So Joseph, at this point, he waits 70 days. The period of mourning has ceased. He then goes, and it's interesting, he doesn't apparently go directly to Pharaoh. He goes to Pharaoh's house, it says. Somebody else, and he says, please go talk to Pharaoh and tell them that I made a promise to my father, and see if he'll give me leave to go. If he'll let me go, I'm going to go bury him, and then I'll come right back. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the household of Joseph and his brothers and his father's household. And they left only their little ones and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen. I want you to just imagine the parade. This is all of the of the adult members of Joseph's family, or Jacob's family, as well as all of the leading men of Egypt that make that trek all the way down there to bury him. There also went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. We think those parades that we have down through Washington when one of our presidents dies is a big deal. Nothing. This was a bunch of people and a big display. That's how much respect Pharaoh had for Joseph. I got to stop. I don't want to stop, but I have to. So verse 10, and we will, without a doubt, finish this next week. Well, actually not next week because that's singing week. I really wanted to get finished tonight, but it didn't happen. So next week is the 6th. It's the 7th. Next week is the 7th. So it'll be the 14th. We're going to halfway through February before we have another class. By the way, just so you know, and you don't miss it, this year in February we have 29 days. This is a leap year. So, verse 10, chapter 50 and verse 10. Thanks for your presence and your participation tonight.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love.